Hello and welcome to our Syxsense October Patch Tuesday webinar. Today, we have our industry expert, Rob Brown, here to give us an inside look into the newest Patch Tuesday release. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Rob will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Rob Brown.
Thank you, Joanna, and a very warm welcome to everybody joining us today for the October webcast. Somebody has a birthday today. Can you believe it's actually been 20 years since Microsoft first released the first Patch Tuesday? And prior to that, as they were detecting vulnerabilities, they used to release patches as and when required, and it became more of a structured release schedule. But what many people don't realize is Patch Tuesday as we know it, which is the second Tuesday of the month, is actually for security fixes. And for 2 other Tuesdays in the month, Microsoft actually releases other types of content. So for example, they'll release .NET Framework non-security patches on the first Tuesday in the month. And on the third Tuesday of the month, they will sometimes release preview updates. And that gives the industry a heads up to test those patches before it makes it into the security Patch Tuesday the following month. It's been a long time, and we've built up a lot of experience over this period. For at least a decade, we've been helping customers to patch their environments to keep them safe, and in doing so, we've deployed over 100 million patches. So we're going to first start up with some 0 days. Now, as we talk about 0 days in theory are supposed to be vulnerabilities that have no fixes. That's why they call them 0 days. In fact, these two do in fact have fixes. So Firefox 118.01 and ESR 115.3.1 both have fixes. Google have quoted, Mozilla has quoted saying that specific handling of an attack, an attacker-controlled VP8 media system could lead to a heap buffer overflow, and it is being exploited in the wild. So if you are using Firefox browsers, please make sure that that is added into your deployment. And also for Google Chrome, 118 is available. This one fixes 20 security issues for Windows, Mac, and Linux. There is also an Android update for this as well. This is actually released just 11 days after the 5th weaponized release of Google Chrome of the year. Much less weaponized than last year. I think we were at 10 or so by this time last year. So Google are clearly releasing much better browsers for us. Now, this is quite an important vulnerability to talk about. This is more from the perspective of detection guidance. So there is a fix for a vulnerability which is being called Rapid Reset. Now, Rapid Reset was detected over the Amazon, Google, and Cloudflare platforms, which is a denial of service attack. And they have detected over the last 12 months an ever increasing attack vector for this particular type of vulnerability, for these denial of service attacks. They have actually exceeded the record to over 398 million requests per second, where previously it was around 40 million. So that's quite a considerable jump. Now, for the platforms such as Amazon and Google, you will need to go and update those platforms directly. However, if you have Microsoft Server and Windows 10, I believe these two are fixed this month with a Microsoft patch. However, we are also aware that a lot of customers are not able to fix all of their operating systems as quickly as they would want to. Microsoft is offering this detection guidance, which is to disable the HTTP2 protocol. using a registry key. So if you take a screenshot of this, you go to the registry key and set the value to 0, and effectively that will disable it. Microsoft is recommending that once you apply the fix, you can then either delete the registry key or set the value to 1. This puts it back to the way it was before we found it. This will require the restart of the computer. So if you do have Windows servers and you're not able to deploy this latest release of updates, then this registry key is incredibly important to apply. Now, in this Patch Tuesday, we had almost double what we had last month, 104 fixes. One of those was an NA assigned fix, which I just mentioned, of which we had 10 critical and 92 important. 10 are more likely to be weaponized. That's twice as many as last month. 2 are weaponized, 2 are public aware, and 3 of them are known as jump points. Now, jump points is recognized as a CVSS scope changed. So when a vulnerability can be exploited through one technology and effectively move to a different technology outside of that technology, we call that a jump point. And those are very, very serious. It is in fact how the SolarWinds attack was so successful, because they were able to go in through one vulnerability, move sideways, and actually leverage other exploits in order to plan and expose their attack. So anything that has a jump point, we highly recommend you include if you have those in your environment. Now, we had a lot of remote code execution vulnerabilities fixed this month. These are the most serious. This is a type of cyber attack in which attackers can remotely execute commands to place malware or other malicious code on your computer or network. In fact, more recently, it doesn't just have to be malware or malicious code. It could be anything from crypto mining to other types of software that's actually looking for other ways to penetrate your environment. But those remote code execution vulnerabilities are extremely serious. We had 24 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities. That's where a threat actor gains access to an employee's account, bypasses the proper authorization channel, and successfully grants themselves access to data that they're not supposed to have. Very, very serious if that is allowed to happen, especially when it comes to security. And we actually have a vulnerability that is one of our recommended ones just for that. We had 16 denial of service vulnerabilities. That's when an attack is meant to shut down a machine or network, making it inaccessible. We had 11 information disclosures. That's when a program unintentionally reveals sensitive information. 5 security feature bypasses. That's, of course, when you can bypass the authentication mechanism and gain unauthorized access. And 1 spoofing vulnerability, which is where you can disguise yourself or receive a different identity. This is the 3rd month since we haven't received a defense in depth, but it's just here because I'm interested just how many times we see that type of vulnerability fixed this year. Now, how are we going to prioritize Patch Tuesday? We could do so by many different ways, but this is our preferred and recommended method. For choosing the patches in your environment, it is important to use a multi-factored approach. We actually use 6 factors for that decision making. So it's not just criticals or just highs. We actually use a multitude of selection criteria just to help us be really selective about the patches that we want to remediate, especially when our managed services customers are not able to take all updates at the same time. Over highly distributed networks or environments such as retail, oil and gas, it may not be possible in small time windows to deploy everything that Microsoft has released. So you need to be very selective and target the most critical fixes first. So we use vendor severity as the initial selection criteria. That typically ranges from critical to NA, with critical being the most serious, NA being the least serious. But we then combine that with the CVSS score. The CVSS score is that independent score out of 10 that we talk about a lot, that actually decides how difficult that vulnerability is to expose. Does it require internet or physical access to the device? And then how much damage can be caused if that was to be exploited? Kind of gives you a better sort of opinion of the vulnerability by comparing that to the vendor alone. And often we find that sometimes a vendor will release a severity that's much lower than the independent score and vice versa. So for us, it's very important to have that transparent selection. You can choose critical or high vendor, critical or high CVSS score, and that probably will select the most serious fixes of the month. Then we're going to choose the state of the vulnerability. So we have, through our partners, Microsoft and other antivirus organizations, access to data that allows us to see if a vulnerability has become weaponized. That means under active exploit. So if a vulnerability is under active exploit, it does not mean that the vendor severity or the CVSS score increases because something is weaponized. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when something becomes weaponized, we can use that to help us trigger a selection that automatically includes that in our process. Public aware, on the other hand, means that somebody, maybe a bug bounty program, has released details on how to expose a vulnerability. You will be surprised just how many of these there are that are public aware that never do become weaponized. Sometimes vulnerabilities are public aware and never are weaponized. Potentially just very, very difficult to do. However, if you're taking it into consideration of something that has been detailed, the precise blueprint on how to follow the steps to exploit, if that's on the internet, I wouldn't want to be an IT manager that decided not to remediate that vulnerability on the chance that it wouldn't be one of those vulnerabilities that wasn't weaponized. Now we need to balance this out with a countermeasure. Now a countermeasure is a combination of a mitigation and a workaround. Mitigation may be that you need to have something enabled, something running. A workaround could be like a registry key, or you may even have a highly sophisticated next-gen antivirus that protects you from this kind of exploit. So countermeasures help us to decide just how quickly we want to remediate if there is a countermeasure available. And sometimes a registry key or turning a service off is much, much quicker to do than rolling out a 1.5 gigabyte patch. And finally, your exposure. The more of the highly prioritized patches that you have, the more important and urgent that patch is to deploy to your environment. And of course, on the flip side, if something is lower severity, lower score, not weaponized, not public aware, with equally as much exposure, maybe that should be in the second run of your deployment, if in fact you're not able to deploy everything at once. Now, it's important if you're a Syxsense customer that all of this is already recorded for you in your console, and you could use any of these as part of your selection criteria within patch management. If you're not a Syxsense customer, it's quite okay. We're actually going to take a look at our selection criteria on our website. We actually publish this every single Patch Tuesday. So if you head across to syxsense.com, you'll find our homepage where you'll see actually what we do at Syxsense. We have access to our resources section, and under our resources section, we have topics such as patch management best practices, endpoint security, cybersecurity, and of course, Patch Tuesday. And under here, we publish all of our details of all of our white papers, recommendations, and news bulletins. And under the October 2023 Patch Tuesday, you'll find the write-up. And this kind of is what we recommend that you do, even if you're not a Syxsense customer. Run through this list, take the CVE number from here, pop it straight into your tool set, and the more of these vulnerabilities that you have in your environment, we would highly recommend that those are the ones that you prioritize. Now, if you have any questions about a patching strategy, a testing strategy, just use the chat in the corner and ask for any of our white papers and we can send that to you. And if you're not a Syxsense customer and you wish to see how Syxsense can help you, you can use the schedule a demo button in the corner there, and we'll walk you through a 15-minute demo. Now, as I mentioned, there were actually an awful lot of updates fixed in this Patch Tuesday, covering everything from Microsoft Windows, Windows components, Exchange, Office components, ASP.NET, Visual Studio. They're the normal ones. Azure as well, Dynamics, and Skype for Business. Skype for Business. Been a long time, I'll have to admit, that since I saw that actually being updated, but it's very important that we talk about that one when we get to it. Now, we have two patches that resolve vulnerabilities which are weaponized, and both of those are public aware as well. So be ultra quick in testing that update and deploying it. If we take all the CVSS scores up from this release, it's actually coming out at 556.8, which is well up on last month, but last month we had half the number of patches. However, when we take the average of this one, it's 7.3. Last month it was 7.4, which means although we had double the number of patches, they are all equally as important as last month. So if you thought that this month is going to be easier for you, I'm afraid every vulnerability like this is probably going to be as important as each other. The first one I'm going to mention is actually the first one that we recommended last month. So we have a continuation of Microsoft WordPad. This one is 2023 36563. Now, as I mentioned, this is the same vulnerability that we recommended last month. It was also weaponized and public aware last month. And now exploiting this vulnerability could allow the disclosure of NTLM hashes. And NTLM hashes is the method in which Microsoft records the username and password combinations. So instead of like writing my username and my password somewhere in the database, they actually convert the username and the password into a hash. And so you can imagine if you are able to extract or disclose that information, you could actually read the username and password that is used for authentication or logging on to the device. Incredibly serious. And this was found by the Microsoft Threat Intelligence team, which is the cybersecurity side of Microsoft. So this is probably or likely to be used in ransomware attacks to exploit access to systems. Now, Microsoft is saying this is only important in severity with a CVSS score of 6.5, but because it's weaponized and because it's public aware and because there are no other countermeasures, this kind of makes it the most serious one of this Patch Tuesday release. Now, its risk is severe. Its attack vector is the network across any network, including the internet, with low attack complexity, no privileges whatsoever. It does require user interaction. It does require you to open an email or open up a document from social media. However, unlike last month, the preview pane is not an attack vector. So you actually need to open the email. You can't just look at the preview pane in order to exploit, but it's still incredibly serious. Luckily, this time we do not have a jump point for this vulnerability. My next one is that Skype for Business. Now, I don't know how many of you use Skype for Business. If you have any Skype for Business clients or if you have the Skype for Business server in your environment, but there's actually two pieces to this. There is a fix for Windows 10, I believe, and also for Skype for Business Server 2013 and 19. So if you have the Skype app and you haven't already upgraded to Teams, then it may be a good time to do so. We are also aware that a lot of our customers are sharing servers for multiple technologies. So it might be that you moved away from Skype for Business, but some of the software is still installed on a device now used by another technology. So it is probably important that if you do have these operating systems or this software still installed, even though you're not using it, please, I would recommend that you deploy this. Vendor severity is important. CVSS is 5.3. It is weaponized. It is public aware with no countermeasure. This is also similar to the first one. Its attack vector is network, including the internet, with low attack complexity, no privileges, and no user interaction whatsoever. Looking at the Microsoft article for this, on that server, you have to download the patch directly from Microsoft. So I don't think you'll find this in the Windows update process. You will actually need to go and download this executable because this will be an upgrade for the Skype for Business application. And lastly, this was also one of our 3 picks last month as well, the Microsoft Message Queuing Remote Code Execution Vulnerability under CVE 2023-35349. Now, this was downgraded, but then re-increased to CVSS 9.8. It was decreased because Windows Message Queuing has to be enabled in order for this vulnerability to be exploited. So this message queuing, Microsoft Message Queuing service usually isn't needed on servers. However, when we tested this ourselves, this service came enabled by default, and there is a huge number of applications which actually turn this on without your knowledge. So just because you're not using Windows messaging, I would recommend that you go at least scan your devices for it and make sure if this is found on those devices, deploy it. It has a vendor severity of critical with a CVSS of 9.8. It is not weaponized. It is not public aware. Its countermeasure is the fact it requires this to be turned on, but that doesn't mean that it's not turned on your devices by default. So probably worth a look. Its risk this month is severe as well. Its attack vector is network across any network, including the internet, with low attack complexity, no privileges, and no user interaction. For all the other vulnerabilities that were released by Microsoft yesterday, we've actually detailed them here as well with some additional details. Like whenever we've been able to collect some additional intelligence, whether it's the exploitability assessment or what Microsoft believe is more exploitable than others, or any additional details such as those workarounds, we've tried to put this here. And as I mentioned, just take a copy of that CVE, pop it into your tool set, and deploy them as urgently as you can. That is it this week. I do appreciate you joining us today. I hope this has been really useful. And if you do have any questions, any question about strategy or best practice or recommendations, we will reach out to you privately. And we really appreciate your time today. So until November, I really wish you the very best and happy patching. Thank you.